Well, this week in our final session, we'll be talking about one important event and one important person. The important person we'll be talking about is Hilda of Whitby. She was a nun, so I need to change my slide. There we go. Hilda of Whitby. She was a nun who was well respected for her wisdom and her leadership. And tonight she will help us think about peacemaking in relationships and reconciliation when there are differences, which, I don't know about you, but it's a super hard thing to do when there are big disagreements, especially when everyone involved is good people, Christian people who have very strong beliefs and opinions. Or just in general, whenever people don't agree with each other, like in a family or a business or a community group, like a church, an HOA, a PTA, people conflicts can get very sticky, very sticky. So, does anyone have a way that they handle those kind of disagreements, conflicts, or any advice on how we should handle them? When people in a group or a family or whatever don't agree, what do you do? Do you speak up or do you keep quiet? How do you handle those kind of group disagreement dynamics? Listen first. Oh, that's a very good thing to do. Very good thing.
I usually either pray or say something stupid.
So either pray or say something stupid. Okay, I would suggest lean on that first one real hard, and it might alleviate the second one. But we've all been there. We've all been there. And usually those kind of people conflicts, they make us a little more anxious. Like the hair on the back of your neck kind of stands up, and you're kind of wound up, and that's when we just kind of we say stupid, goofy, kind of weird things. Some people will just jump into those disagreements and say, well, what do you think? Well, this is what I think. And we'll just kind of work the process. And some people will kind of back away and let it happen. Always good to listen first. Always good to pray first. Yeah. Well, Hilda of Whitby is a great model for doing that. So, who was Hilda? Do you remember 2 weeks ago we talked about, there she is, Hilda of Whitby. There she is. 2 weeks ago we talked about Oswald. When he was young, he was a prince in Northumbria, but he had to flee to the monastery in Iona when his father was killed in battle by an uncle, by Oswald's uncle Edwin. So Oswald had to flee in exile, grew up in Iona, raised by Aidan and the other monks there. So Oswald became a Christian in the style of the Iona Celtic monks there. So when he got a little older and he was able to go back to Northumbria and retake his kingdom and become the king, then he got Aidan to help him spread Christianity throughout the kingdom of Northumbria. So that was what was going on with Oswald. Well, while Oswald was in exile, after he had fled and his uncle was the king, that is when Hilda was born in the royal family. So, Oswald's dad and his uncle, kind of warring kings, and there was other aunts and uncles and cousins in this kind of royal family of Northumbria. And Hilda was born into the royal family. So she was well-to-do and had a comfortable life at the time. The queen at the time had grown up in southern England. So here on this map, so here's the area of Northumbria in the north of England. There's Lindisfarne. And in the southern part of England, that's where the queen at the time had grown up. And it is true that missionaries from Rome had come into southern England and had already been preaching to specific important people. like the royal family members here in southern England, like that queen. So when the queen married into the royal family of Northumbria and moved up there, she helped the rest of the royal family become Christian. And Hilda was then baptized when she was 13 years old by the queen's Christian chaplain. She took her chaplain, her missionary from Rome, up to Northumbria, and that's who baptized Hilda when she was 13. But then, after a few years, Edwin himself was killed in battle by a neighboring pagan king from one of these local kingdoms. So then Hilda herself had to flee, and she headed down south, kind of like here's where Whitby is, and she kind of headed down south into a little safer area. She had been inspired by stories of Aidan and Aidan's work and mission and ministry at Lindisfarne. So when Hilda was 33 years old, she became a nun. 10 years later, in Whitby, you'll see Whitby there on the east coast, she founded a monastery, Whitby Abbey, and it was called a double monastery because it included both men and women. So Hilda founded Whitby Abbey, and since she had been inspired by Aidan from Lindisfarne, who himself was inspired by the first guy we talked about, Columba at Iona, what do you think some of Hilda and her monastery's priorities were? I'll give you a hint. It's kind of the same priorities of mission as the other saints and missionaries we've been talking about. So what do you think her priorities were in her monastery? See how well you've been paying attention the last week. Say what? Yes, spread the gospel, teach more people about Christianity, make more Christians, yes. Evangelism. Mm-hmm.
Make more books.
Ooh, yes, copy more books. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Make sure there's sufficient time for prayer and rest.
Lots of time for prayer, lots of time for rest. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about the vibe? What kind of vibe would they been sporting it with me? Hospitality was big. Not just making brand new Christians, but training those who became Christians. So it was a teaching and a learning monastery as well. Hilda was known for her deep wisdom. So much like we heard last week about Cuthbert, he kept trying to go by himself just to pray all day, but anywhere from kings to peasants would seek his advice. Same thing with Hilda. Kings, nobles, and commoners alike would come to her for advice. So if all those different kinds of people went to her for wisdom, what does that say about her spirit, her qualities, her demeanor? What kind of person might she have been like if all those kind of folks would come to her for wisdom? Take some guesses. Kind, very kind. Yes, very kind.
A good listener.
Ooh, yes, a very good listener. Yeah. Probably non-judgmental at first. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Discerning, yes. Yeah. The kind of discernment that comes from wisdom. Yeah. So it's the kind of person anybody would want to go to talk to about what they're wrestling with, to kind of talk it out and get some of her kindness and her discernment and her wisdom. So definitely qualities that we need more of today. I think the Christian church in America needs more of those qualities, because it's almost like the stereotype of the Christian church in America is the opposite. Like people outside of the church, they think, well, I would never go to a Christian minister or churchgoer for wisdom because they're not kind, they don't listen, they are judgy, they don't have a lot of wisdom. So we need more Hildas today, so that the outside world can see if you want some good, deep wisdom, then find good discerning, kind, loving, listening Christian people to go to. Well, under her leadership at Whitby Abbey, it became a popular, well-known center of learning, hospitality, missionary training, all the things that Iona was, and then Lindisfarne and Melrose that we talked about last week. So this became another one that produced many future leaders of the church. So many people who were trained there went on to become pastors and priests and missionaries and bishops. Many people who trained there became local bishops around England. So when we see her picture, oftentimes she'll be holding a church, like holding Whitby Abbey. And in a minute, I'll show you another statue of her where she's surrounded by the heads of bishops, because her work produced more and more good Christian leaders. One example, and this kept coming up when I was reading about St. Hilda, was that she was really encouraging, that she had a real encouraging presence, which is another reason people would go and talk to her. And the one example is that she became the mentor of a man named Caedmon, who thought that he had no gifts or talent to offer. But Hilda helped him find the voice that God had given him. And Caedmon went on to become apparently the first ever Christian poet in the English language, which is an interesting bit of trivia, but somebody's got to be the first. It was this guy named Caedmon, and he was mentored by Hilda at Whitby. She's important for a lot of reasons. One reason, she was a wonderful model of women's leadership in the early days of the Christian church in Britain, starting a whole incredible monastery, being in charge of both men and women, monks and nuns. Through her wisdom, she was able to lead the church through a time of reconciliation and compromise. So let's talk about that story. It was a few years after she had founded Whitby Abbey. She had been the director a few years, and it was chosen to be the location of an important debate among church leaders throughout England and Scotland. And it became known as the Synod of Whitby. It was in the year 664 AD. We don't use the word synod very often. Lutherans do. Lutherans in America today still have synods. Other denominations in America today use the word synod, like a group, a gathering, a meeting. In this case, it was a debate. So, what was this big debate about at the Synod of Whitby? Here's the backstory. So before the year 500 AD, Christianity had only spread into Great Britain by way of the Roman Empire's expansion. Because even though in the New Testament, the Romans, like the Roman Empire, Pontius Pilate, they were kind of the oppressive authority figures that didn't really cooperate. The locals, the Jews and Christians, didn't really like the Romans because they were the conquering empire. But then after the New Testament, one of the Roman emperors becomes a Christian, and he says, guess what? Now everybody in the Roman Empire is Christian. You have to be Christian. So wherever the Roman Empire spread, which was a lot of places, it also carried the church and the gospel and the message of the church. And it became kind of an easy medium or conduit for missionaries, because they had Roman legions, they had local governors on their side to kind of go with them as protection and enforcement in spreading the Christian message. But whenever the Roman Empire would expand into new territory, the locals didn't really like them taking the land. Who would? So there was conflict, and the locals naturally were not interested in the religion that the Roman Empire was bringing and pushing. So here in this map, you don't really have to read it very closely. You can just see that this says Romano-Britons. That just means British people who were Roman. So like Europe would have been down here, and this was as far as the Roman Empire spread. Kind of up here, they even put a wall up here, Hadrian's Wall, to keep those pagan Scots out and protect kind of the very frontier of the Roman Empire. So this is kind of as far as the Christian message had spread a little bit from the church's headquarters, which had moved to Rome by this time. And later, in the 400s, when the Roman Empire fell, it was attacked, it was kind of conquered and fell apart, then the locals in Britain, like the Welsh, the Cornish, the Scots, the Picts, and even the Angles and Saxons from over here, they started kind of reclaiming the territory. So the number of Christians in Britain kind of shrunk even smaller when the Roman Empire officially left. So when the Roman Empire pulled out of Great Britain, then that meant that the official spread of the Christian message halted. Some folks were still there who had become Christians. Some were still around. Many were living kind of in the outskirts. They kind of had to flee to Wales or Cornwall. And it was those few kind of stragglers, local stragglers, after the Roman Empire pulled out, who then just spread the gospel personally, word of mouth, person to person, without the official empire backing them. So like St. Patrick, who he was from Great Britain, from England, and then went to Ireland and took the Christian message into Ireland, where it thrived and it spread all through Ireland over the next few decades. And Columba, who we learned about 3 weeks ago, he became Christian, and then he founded lots of monasteries in Ireland, and then went to Iona and founded a monastery there, and then Aidan, who went to Northumbria, and they were spreading the Christian message kind of on their own, because the Romans had pulled out, they were kind of left on their own, and since they all kind of started from Ireland, that's why we call this flavor, this branch of Christianity, Celtic Christianity, because St. Patrick and St. Columba, starting in Ireland, kind of brought their flavor to Iona, and then Lindisfarne, Northumbria, and it kind of started spreading. This Celtic Christianity started spreading in southern Scotland and northern England. And Iona was kind of like the lead church, like the church that kept planting other churches that planted other churches. Now, there were still a few missionaries that would come from Rome, and since Rome was kind of down here to the southeast, a few missionaries would still kind of keep coming into England. And by a few, I think it was only like 3 or so. And they would make inroads with the gospel, but it was slow going. Meanwhile, the Celtic church was thriving, all the monasteries we've been talking about. But because all those Celtic churches and monasteries were kind of cut off, separate from the headquarters church in Rome, their local flavor kind of developed and evolved in different ways than the official Christian headquarters in Rome church was like telling people, like, this is how you be church, this is how you do worship, this is how blah, 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 these are the rules for being church. Well, the Celtic Christians were on their own. There wasn't an internet, there wasn't newsletters, and they were just spreading the gospel. And kind of like different denominations, you know, Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, Lutherans, they might have a different feel for their worship style. They might sing different hymns. They might have different prayers or liturgy. But it was kind of like that, since the Celtic Christian churches developed out there on their own. And it was in Northumbria that those two flavors, those two styles kind of collided. So as missionaries from Rome kind of slowly kept coming up here, eventually they reached Northumbria. And as the Celtic Christians went to Iona and started spreading the message, over here to Lindisfarne and in Northumbria. It was right here that those two flavors, those two kind of denominations or ways of being church kind of ran into each other. And remember how I said a few minutes ago, the local queen in Northumbria had become a Christian when she was growing up down south. Well, that meant that her church style was the Roman Christian style. So, when she got up there, then she was a little different than the rest of the royal family. When Oswald, who we saw his picture a few minutes ago, when he became king, he had grown up, remember, in Iona, so he brought kind of Celtic Christianity himself. So those two flavors, those two kind of different denominations or ways of thinking were really kind of coming to a head. And while Aidan was alive, the differences weren't that much of a problem. He was such an inspiring figure that everyone just kind of cooperated and didn't cause a stir. But after Aidan died, one local monk who had been trained in Rome, in the Christian headquarters of the church in Rome, he said, okay, Aidan has died, so enough of this. It's time to do things the right way. There were two big differences. And of course, the Celtic Christians had their way, and the Roman Christians had their way. And whenever you have two different styles of doing church, each person, each group thinks that their way is the right way. So therefore, any other ways, well, it must be the wrong way. That's how right and wrong works, right? So here were the two big differences that they had to fight it out and argue and figure things out at the Synod of Whitby. The two super important, really big differences. The calendar and haircuts. Those were literally the two things, the main things. There were other small kind of differences, but the calendar and haircuts were the two big things that they had to figure out who's right and who's wrong. So the calendar thing, you know how Easter is like really hard to calculate? You never know when Easter's going to be until you just like look it up. When is Easter this year? Okay. And the math for that, it's something like the first Sunday after the first full moon of the vernal equinox, or is that what it is?
After the first day of spring.
After the first day of spring.
After the first full moon, after the first day of spring.
Okay, after the sparrow chirps and the groundhog doesn't see a shadow in the sea. It's just us. Okay. See, Paul would know, I do not. And it's weirdly complicated now because it's not like we know what day of the year Jesus came back from the dead on the first Easter. Over time they just kind of picked some kind of way to calculate it. Well, different churches had come up with different ways to calculate it. Like, we should do it at the first Sunday after the full moon, the beginning of the spring. But another church, the Celtic church, would say, no, we should do it on the first Sunday after the whatever it was. So there was these two different ways to decide when Easter is going to be every year. Again, the simplest way is to just Google, when will Easter be this year, and it'll tell you. But they had different approaches for figuring out Easter. It became a problem, especially in Northumbria, when some people were following the Roman Church's calendar, some people were following the Celtic Church's calendar. So that meant that some people already started being loud and shouting hallelujah on Easter, while other people were still trying to be quiet and fast for Lent. And so they would say, stop making a racket, we're trying to be quiet, we're fasting, we're in prayer. And they're like, no, Jesus is risen, hallelujah. So you can see how if you're trying to be quiet and give up meat or soda or whatever they gave up back then, and your neighbors are having the biggest, loudest Easter sunrise service, that it would cause some friction. It doesn't take much for neighbors and noise volumes to cause friction. So, something had to be done. That was the first big problem. The second big problem was the hairstyles of the monks. So each approach, and it sounds stupid, each approach had its own hairstyle. And you definitely don't want to have a sinful haircut, right? You want to have a righteous haircut. So, I don't know, not me, it's whoever, I don't know, maybe.
We had this conversation the other day.
That's right. Nick, in his dedication to ministry, he wanted to make sure he didn't, his hairstyle didn't get shipwrecked into a sinful haircut. He wanted to maintain a righteous haircut. And more power to him. So that was their debate, is what kind of haircut should monks have? And they argued which one was the right haircut.
Do you have pictures? Oh,
I
cool.
do have pictures. So at the top, the Roman style would leave a circle of hair and they would shave like the very tip top. So they would have like a hair circle. The Celtic style, they would kind of go ear to ear and they would either have a stripe in the middle or they would do just hair on the front, bald in the back. Kind of like the anti-mullet, you might say. And to them, it was really, really important. And it's always funny to read about arguments in church history that people back then thought were super important. Even like in the book of Acts. We did a study through Acts, I think it's maybe Acts 15, where the first Christian church has to have a big debate. Do we require men to be circumcised? This is super important, everybody. And there was debates and arguments, and they had to figure it out. And then, centuries later, people were like, that's not important. Jesus is important. But now, in the year 664, his haircuts. And it was really important. And now we can say, that's not important. Jesus is the one important. Like, doesn't matter what hairstyle. Even like 60 years ago in the American South, should white churches allow black people to join as members? Was a huge deal. It would split churches right apart. Anger, spite, yelling, lines in the sand. It was so important. And then now we know that's not a thing. Jesus is important. That should not be a big deal. And so it makes me wonder, like 100 years from now, our great-great-great-grandchildren will look back and they'll say, that's whatever the thing was that y'all are fighting about, that's not important. Jesus is important. Get over yourselves. It doesn't matter what your haircut is like, okay? They might have their own disagreements in 100 years. I don't know. If the Christian church can be so creative as to fight over hairstyles, then I know that they will come up with something to fight about 100 years hence. So each side at the synod, even last week when we were looking at this painting of St. Cuthbert's body being opened up and reburied, even the monks there had the Roman style of their haircut. So that was the picture from last week. And since I hadn't kind of finished getting ready, I didn't notice, like, oh, those monks have Roman style. And that's kind of a spoiler alert as to how the Synod of Whitby ends up. Okay, so here we are, Synod of Whitby, 664. So each side of the debate chooses their presenter, kind of like their kind of defense attorney, like, who's arguing for like the prosecution or the defense. Each side picked one person, and I'll give you a handout at the end, and it tells you like who the people were. And so each side gets out, they present their case, and the king at that time in 664 was a guy named Oswu. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, not sure. Oswu. So he was the judge of this debate. He presided over it, and it was decided that he would give the final ruling, one side of the other. So at the end of hearing all the arguments from the Roman Christians and the Celtic Christians about calendars and haircuts, Oswu declared that his judgment was in favor of the Roman style, because he said Simon Peter was given the keys to the kingdom, and Jesus said, on this rock I will build my church. And the church in Rome tracked their leadership back to Simon Peter, and they billed themselves as, we're the continuation of Peter's church. We're the Peter church people. And so King Oswiu said, I gotta go with the Peter people, because Jesus said, on this rock I'll build my church. So I gotta go with the church in Rome, with their calendar and with their funky haircuts. Which haircut would you vote for? Who votes for the Roman haircut? Raise your hand. Okay, not a lot of winners. Who votes? That's 1, 2. Who votes for the Celtic haircut? Okay, so maybe a little more. I would abstain because they all look dumb.
Those guys get over those haircuts before we win.
I would have said, why are you stressing about it? Just everybody do honeycomb. So after that, after the Synod of Whitby concluded, it established the Roman practices to be the norm. Okay, everybody, we've had some different approaches, different kind of denomination, kind of different flavors here in Northumbria, but from now on, King Oswiu has decided we'll follow the Roman practices. And there were a few other minor things, like maybe worship service kind of things. Nothing quite as important as calendars and haircuts, but there were some other things. And just kind of the meaning of it, it was a ruling in favor of that Roman church, and therefore against kind of what the Celtic Christians had been doing. So after that, even though the local bishop had been living on Lindisfarne, the local bishop's office, like the county seat, was moved into the mainland to the city of Durham, and that's why they moved St. Cuthbert's bones. They opened up his coffin and moved his bones to Durham, because Lindisfarne was such a Celtic Christian kind of hotbed or something. So they needed to kind of diminish the influence of Lindisfarne. And all the people who still supported the Celtic Christian practices kind of withdrew to Iona and up into Scotland, and I guess they took their haircuts with them and their calendars with them. Lindisfarne still kind of kept the Celtic practices, but St. Cuthbert over time helped them kind of evolve and fall in line with all the other Christian churches. At this time, it was so early, there wasn't really any denominations. There was no kind of Catholics and Protestants or Baptists and Presbyterians. It was really just the Christian church. And so this was kind of a new thing, whoa, you all do it that way? You celebrate Easter when? You cut your hair how? It was kind of a different problem to run into, since at this time everybody was just the Christian church that was based in Rome. So when in Northumbria the friction started, then they had to figure out, well, who's right, who's wrong, which haircut would God favor. So let's go back to Hilda. This is a stone carving of her, and I'll tell you why she is important in this story. You can see from the stone carving that she is surrounded by bishops' heads, because Whitby Abbey produced so many pastors and bishops. She was said to be very close with nature, much like St. Cuthbert, much like St. Aidan. And you might remember last week, St. Cuthbert was so close with nature that when he would pray barefoot in the cold sea, it was said that otters would warm and dry his feet afterwards. Well, Hilda was said to be so close with nature that when she would see a snake, she would curse it, and the snake would coil up and turn to stone. So you see the coiled snakes there at her feet. And the local legend was that's how the spiral ammonite fossils came to be on the beaches. Kind of those like seashell, spiral, prehistoric fossils. That was their legend of how they came to be, is that Hilda went, boom, no more snakes. And so she's often depicted standing on snakes that have been rolled and become stone ammonites, and carrying a shepherd's staff, because she was a church leader of both men and women. So again, it was her monastery that was chosen for this really important, and it was important at the time. We kind of laugh about the idea of arguing over calendars and haircuts, but it was really important to them at the time, and they chose Hilda's monastery at Whitby, which says a lot about her monastery, her leadership, her reputation, that this is a place anyone can go to and we can get an objective ruling with no kind of prejudgment, no prejudice. And naturally, with any disagreement, if one side is definitely chosen over another side, that side people will get disappointed. If it's just a binary, only one winner, and therefore the other side is the losers, then some people will be disappointed. Hilda was a very wise leader. She was a bridge builder. She was a reconciler. Even though personally, since she was inspired by Aidan, she personally preferred the Celtic Christian church practices and flavor. But she accepted the decision of the church, the decision of King Oswiu, and she modeled humility and worked towards unity. So she helped the people who would have been disappointed figure out how to move forward. I assume she helped the people who already practiced the Roman style maybe not be arrogant and not rub it in, because she really wanted to bring people together as a peacemaker and as a bridge builder. So here's our application question. How does Hilda's response challenge us in handling disagreement or disappointment in the church today? What can we learn from St. Hilda of Whitby? Unity is important. Yes. Yes. And unity is different than uniformity. But working together, cooperation, that unity is important. We're stronger together than we are separate.
It is hard to love your neighbor when you're pissed at them.
It's hard to love your neighbor when you're mad at them. Yeah, yeah. Or when they disagree, and when you think they're totally wrong, because you must be right. Because if you were wrong, you'd change your mind. And I didn't, so I must be right. If they disagree, then they're the ones that are wrong. And it's hard to love your neighbor when you're mad at them and you disagree.
And so her example of trying to get over that and find a way forward is important.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And she would have been a good person to do that already if everyone from kings to peasants, nobles to commoners, would seek her guidance and wisdom. Then she's used to connecting with all different kinds of people, meeting them wherever they are in life, and saying, how can we help you grow? How can we work together? How can I mentor you? How can I lift you up? And so she, I guess naturally, just everyone thought, okay, we need to argue this out. Where should we go? Let's go to Hilda's Abbey at Whitby. We'll get a fair hearing. She will welcome everyone. So you can see even before the debate, not just afterwards. Like Hilda is a good example for us after disagreements have happened, votes have been cast, rulings have been made. She's a good example on how to keep working together and find unity. But she's also a good example before that ever happened, because she had a reputation for someone that people could go to, anyone could go to. And that would have been years of her just being herself, living out her calling, doing her work. And it's kind of like I said about our church after the hurricane. And it's really interesting that every week something about our church's mission and work after the hurricane comes up from these stories. But after the hurricane, our church was blessed with helping a lot of people because years of relationship building paid off and bore fruit and came to fruition in ways that we never expected, we never needed. You know, it's not like our church is a nice participating member of our community so we can get something out of it, so we can get attention, because we want a good reputation. Like, we just want to be loving Jesus people. And then after the hurricane, the community needed a place to go that was loving and welcoming, and they knew I can get some help there. People, might have some resources, and welcoming, hospitality, all that stuff. So Hilda is another good example, even years before, when there are no disagreements, there are no fights, to just be loving people and build those relationships. So here is our scripture connection for tonight. It comes from the book of James, chapter 3, verses 17 through 18. So listen to how Hilda modeled these verses. This is the book of James, chapter 3, verses 17 and 18. The wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. So how does Hilda model and exemplify those verses? What did you hear that resonated with her story?
All those things.
All the things, yes, yes. I feel like she might have had that verse like on her mirror in her bathroom or something. If it had mirrors back then, or bathrooms. Post-its?
Peacemaking?
Peacemaking. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Mm-hmm. The Synod of Whitby was the biggest deal at the time. It was a huge deal. And later on, it determined the course of the Christian church in Great Britain. So it was hugely important for every church in Great Britain from then on. And they held it at Whitby. So that tells us that Hilda was a peacemaker who had already been sowing in peace, and she reaped a harvest of righteousness because everyone knew they could go to her abbey, her monastery, and they could be welcomed, loved, get a fair hearing, be listened to. See, I heard wisdom, pure, peace-loving, good fruit that it bears, impartial and sincere. Impartial and sincere, which is sometimes hard to hold both of those in balance. How might it be hard to be both impartial and sincere? Why might that be tricky? Who are the most sincerest folks? Is it the impartial folks, or is it the ones who are totally convinced? Like, the ones who are totally convinced are usually the most sincere. So it's kind of a tricky dichotomy to be both impartial, unbiased, but also sincere. So how can we be impartial, unbiased, but also sincere at the same time? How does that work? What does that look like? What do you think?
Being aware that we can be wrong.
Being aware that we might be wrong. Yes, yes.
It's easy to get caught up in who is right,
Mm-hmm.
who's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to what's right.
Yes. Yes. It's easy to focus on like the personalities or the people. Like, I'm mad at that person. But just to take a step back and say, well, what are we discussing here? Let's take the personalities out of it. Like, what's the issue? What's important? What are our priorities? And you know, I think of the verse, test the spirits to see if they are from God. Because none of us are perfect. We're not all going to be right all the time. Even though I tell my wife I am, she has not believed me yet. Maybe she's got a point. I don't know. But it's always helpful to remember, as confident as we might be, we are never 100% right. And the person opposite from us is never 100% wrong. They might be 90-something%, but they're not 100%. And we are not 100% right. So hold impartiality and sincerity in your heart, and let them play with each other. And some days you might do a better job of being really impartial, and some days you might do a better job of being really sincere. But let those two healthy, positive Jesus forces work in you. How was Jesus impartial and sincere? As always, Jesus is our ultimate model. How did he model both?
He didn't judge.
He didn't judge. Yeah. Other people wanted to judge. They wanted to follow the rules of the Bible and stone the woman caught in adultery. But Jesus said, nope, we're not going to do that. We're going to show love. You're forgiven. Go now and sin no more. And, I mean, he was sincere. He kicked over some tables when he needed to. And he preached fervently. But he didn't turn anyone away. He would preach with sincerity. And sometimes people would turn themselves away. Like the rich young ruler, when he said, what else do I have to do? And Jesus said, well, the only thing else you got to do is sell all your possessions and give money to the poor. And the rich young ruler said, okay, well, thanks anyway. Take it easy. So Jesus never turned anyone away. He preached with sincerity, and he welcomed with impartiality. And then, because he was so clear in his values of grace, then other people would choose to turn away. So, that concludes our Celtic Christianity series. I have really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. Any final thoughts? What did you like? What did you learn? What did you think was weird in learning about the ancient Celtic Christians?
Another what you just said, but this picture here, I find it interesting. The bishops have a mitre, a unique hat. But she has a bishop's crozier, the shepherd's hook. Like, that's interesting. I wonder what that, if it was just because she was head of an abbey, or if that was some kind of way to connect her with the bishop's leadership. That's not usual.
Other notes? Someone said? I heard something.
The haircut.
That haircut's weird, yeah. Yeah. And a good reminder for us, the things that we might think are super important, it's Jesus that's important. Whatever the personal human preference is, we need to, like Nick said, remember, we might not be right about everything. So we need to recognize human preference, yeah.
I was just gonna say, the Eastern Orthodox had a third haircut.
Right, yes.
They shaved everyone's head.
Yes. We're not even counting like the Orthodox Christians that branched off later in like Greece and Russia. Yes, they have a whole different haircut, whole different calendar. Even still today, the Orthodox churches have a different calendar for Easter and other holy days. Well, let me end with this prayer. The Celtic Christians were big on walking and journeys, and to them, even a short walk was an opportunity to think about their own spiritual walk with God. And they could feel that God was with them on the road wherever they went as a companion, every day, everywhere. And they were so comfortable with the joyful presence of God walking with them everywhere, that they would even laugh in their prayers. So this is a Celtic prayer of walking. And see if you hear some laughter. I on thy path, O God, thou God in my steps. Bless to me, O God, the earth beneath my foot. Bless to me, O God, the path whereon I go. My walk this day with God, my walk this day with Christ, my walk this day with the Spirit, the threefold all kindly. Ha ha ha! The threefold all kindly. My shielding this day from ill, my shielding this night from harm. Ha ha! Both my soul and my body be by Father, by Son, by Holy Spirit, by Father, by Son, by Holy Spirit. Be the Father shielding me, be the Son shielding me, be the Spirit shielding me, as three and as one, ha ha ha, as three and as one, amen. So, take that as your sending prayer, laugh as you go, and have a blessed journey wherever you end up. Brian, can you give one handout to everybody? On one side is info about St. Hilda of Whitby, and that we talked about tonight, and on the other side is info about the Synod of Whitby and who the different people that were involved. So, go in peace to love and serve the Lord, and only get righteous haircuts.